On every street in America, there's always that neighbor, the friendly one, the helpful one, the one everyone trusts. On Maple Street, that neighbor was Kenneth Moore. A quiet, gentle, overly considerate man who went out of his way to make everyone feel safe. But behind the smiles, behind the neighborly kindness, was a secret so dark, so unsettling, so calculated, that the entire community would later ask themselves, how did we not see it? This is the story of Maple Street's perfect neighbor, and the day his mask finally slipped. Maple Street was the kind of place where people still borrowed sugar from each other. Kids played outside until dinner. Dogs wandered from porch to porch, knowing they'd always find someone handing out treats. And in the center of this peaceful neighborhood was Kenneth Moore, a 45-year-old handyman who had lived there nearly a decade. He was the guy who mowed lawns without being asked, the guy who shoveled snow for older residents, the guy who fixed broken mailboxes and refused payment. To many people, Kenneth was a blessing, a gentle, reliable presence. But to one person in particular, 72-year-old widow, Mrs. Linda Harper, Kenneth was more than a neighbor. He was the closest thing to family she had left. She called him my guardian angel, and she meant it. Mrs. Harper had lived on Maple Street for almost 30 years. After her husband passed, she became increasingly dependent on her neighbors, especially Kenneth. He brought her groceries, drove her to appointments, helped set up her new phone, sat with her when she felt lonely. To everyone watching, it looked wholesome. It looked kind. It looked like humanity at its best. But for Kenneth, this wasn't kindness. It was preparation. Months of positioning himself in her life, gaining her trust, learning her habits, and most importantly, learning what she didn't have: children visiting, family checking in, people who would immediately notice if something went wrong. Kenneth saw an opportunity, and he waited. On the night of September 14th, Mrs. Harper was expected at her church's weekly social gathering. She never missed it, ever. But that Wednesday, she didn't show up. Friends called her phone. No answer. They knocked on her door. Nothing. Concerned, the pastor contacted the local police for a welfare check. Officers arrived at 8:47 p.m. They noticed her porch light was still on. Her car was in the driveway. Her mail was untouched. Everything looked normal, but no one responded to the knocking. And then Kenneth appeared. Calm, soft-spoken, concerned or pretending to be. He told officers he'd seen her earlier that morning. She said she wasn't feeling well, he said. I hope she's okay. But officers noticed something strange. His clothes were messy. His hands smelled faintly of bleach. And he seemed nervous, a kind of subtle, shaky nervousness that didn't match his calm voice. Police thanked him and went back to Mrs. Harper's home. Still locked, still silent. But then, a tiny detail changed everything. The back door was unlocked. Mrs. Harper never left doors unlocked. Not once in 30 years. The officers now knew something wasn't right. Officers spoke with the neighbor behind Mrs. Harper, a woman whose house had a clear view of the backyards. She had security cameras installed. She pulled up the footage, and at exactly 5:13 a.m., the camera captured a blurry figure walking from Mrs. Harper's backyard into Kenneth's backyard. But this wasn't just anyone. It was Kenneth, wearing the same jacket he had on earlier, and he was carrying a large black trash bag. No gardening tools, no gloves, nothing that made sense for that hour of the morning. Just the bag. Investigators now shifted their attention. What was once a welfare check was now a potential crime scene. Police returned to Kenneth's home with a warrant. He acted surprised, confused. He repeatedly said, "This must be some mistake." But the moment they stepped inside, officers felt something was off. The house was spotless, too spotless, like it had been cleaned top to bottom recently and aggressively. And then they found the basement. Behind a heavy wooden wardrobe was a locked trunk. Inside it were dozens of items: jewelry, old watches, wallets, letters, prescription bottles. belongings that matched several elderly residents who had passed away or moved out in the last 8 years. Families had always assumed these items were lost. They weren't lost. They were trophies, collected by the man everyone trusted. Police then located the bag Kenneth had carried that morning. Inside were Mrs. Harper's medication bottles, a dish towel with dried blood, and a pair of gloves with fibers matching her living room carpet. At this point, Kenneth's story collapsed. He had no explanation. He could no longer pretend. And when investigators showed him the footage, he broke. He confessed. Kenneth admitted he had grown obsessed with Mrs. Harper's savings, her retirement funds, her jewelry, anything valuable she might leave behind. He claimed it wasn't supposed to go that far, that he lost control, that he never meant to hurt her. But investigators had heard it all before. Mrs. Harper wasn't just a target. She was his longest planned one. What Kenneth didn't know was that Mrs. Harper was still alive, barely conscious. She had been found inside her home, injured but fighting. She survived after emergency treatment. When she woke up, her first words were, "Where's Kenneth? Tell him I'm okay." The truth shattered her. The man she trusted most, the man she believed was family, had been the one who betrayed her. Her recovery took weeks, but she eventually moved to live with relatives, far away from Maple Street. She never returned. News spread fast. The entire street, the entire town, felt a sense of disbelief. People replayed old conversations with him, remembered the times he helped with chores, recalled how safe he made them feel. And then the guilt set in. How did no one see it? How could a predator hide in plain sight for years? But the truth is simple. He didn't hide through fear. He hid through kindness. Predators don't always look dangerous. Sometimes they look helpful. Sometimes they look ordinary. Sometimes they look like the best neighbor you ever had. Kenneth Moore was sentenced to decades in prison. Maple Street eventually healed, but it never returned to what it was. Mrs. Harper survived, but she'll never forget the lesson she learned the hardest way. Trust is powerful, but blind trust is dangerous, because sometimes the person who smiles the brightest is hiding the darkest shadow. Stay aware.